Hi guys and welcome back to Gryphon Studio. My name is Alan and this week I've been making some cages. So I've got three different designs, different skill levels, different types of dungeons, different shapes. And honestly, this was more of a learning experience for me than anything else. I'm not saying that this is the right way to make these cages, but it's the way that I wanted to make them. It's the way I figured I could make them with the supplies that I had. So first things first, there are no doors on these cages. Doors probably aren't necessary for very tiny cages made at 28mm scale. Typically all they do is compromise the structural rigidity of the finished piece because you've got a door in the middle and really you want it to just be a nice solid wall. Also, it's hard to create these little hinges that are not clunky massive things, and hinges should really be relatively small, and these cages are kind of on a weird scale. I could do a whole video about scale in terms of 28mm gaming, but honestly, like the bars on these cages would be something like that in real life, which is obviously a little bit exaggerated. The whole point of these cages is not to have doors, and instead to be more aesthetically pleasing and really just do the job in terms of dungeon decoration. And you can put miniatures inside them because there are no bottoms on two of these cages, so yeah, they're totally possible to put miniatures inside. And some cages are more like a drop cage rather than a lockable cage with a door. So that's what I've been making this week. Let's just get on with it, shall we? Alright, let's start with a really important piece. This is some granny grating or some plastic mesh, I think usually used for crochet or embroidery or something like that, but it's a pain to paint, so the trick is to apply something to it before you spray it with an undercoat. I'm going to use this photo mount spray adhesive and it works really, really well. So first of all, I'm going to take a piece of this granny grating. I'm going to make it 3 inches wide. That's going to be the width of this main cage. And I'm just using the lines on my cutting mat to make this nice and straight. And I think a 3-inch cage is pretty good. It's going to fit, maybe a couple of different miniatures in it, multiple player characters hopefully, and as long as I don't make it an absolute perfect cube, it won't look too weird. And for the height of the cage, I'm going to use a miniature here. This is a standard 28mm scale miniature, so I think something like 2 inches should be about right. So I cut out 4 2-inch walls of this mesh, and those are going to be the walls of the cage. And the first bit I made there was going to be the roof. I then cut out and painted a piece of XPS foam in a kind of base for these walls, these cage walls. And I'm going to use some toothpicks for support, and just going to glue these to the side there, and hopefully that will be enough to keep it in place. You can also glue the wall sections down to the base there because the foam is protected with the Mod Podge and black paint. And with that final wall just secured on there, a bit more super glue along the edges, and I'm going to then apply the roof. Now I'm just poking these cocktail sticks through the corner holes, and that'll give me basically a full cage. I'm going to super glue the edges all along the roof as well, just to make sure it stays put. And for the base coat, I'm going to use a very dark brown. This one is called Rhinox Hide by Citadel, and I'm just going to go over the whole thing. This is a really nice base coat for all kinds of rusting metal. And I occasionally add a little bit of burnt sienna here, just as a craft paint. Burnt sienna just to the Rhinox hide while it's wet, and just try and blend it in and create some lighter patches where the rust has come through. And then I'm going to take a dry paint, a technical paint from Games Workshop called Riser Rust. I'm just going to kind of dot that around and then start blending it into the cage wall there. That'll give a really nice rusty effect. Different tones and different kinds of intensities of the orange really add to the effect. Okay, so to make this new different style cage, I'm going to use 3 pieces of this granny grating, this plastic mesh, and I'm going to cut out the center. So I've got a piece that looks like this. Now I'm going to do it to all 3 pieces, and then I'm going to poke matchsticks through the holes, but it's every other hole. So I'm just going to skip one and then poke a matchstick through the next one. And then once you've done this with all 3 layers of it, where the matchsticks travel through each layer in the same hole in each layer, you get a nice evenly spaced bars, and they're all nice and straight, and you get a really nice bar width and a gap between them, and then you can just paint it up. Now this is why I had to film this piece separately, because I missed out my footage and somehow lost it. And either way, here it shows the spacing of the bars while I'm applying the paint, same paint job as before, and you get a really nice effect because those bars are spaced evenly by the plastic mesh. One of the best things about this design is that it doesn't need a base, and you can also see through the bars really easily, so you can see what poor miniature is inside. Really like this one. Now for this next design, I'm going to need a little bit of wood here, so I've got this little box of random bits of wood. None of these pieces were really appropriate for my design, so I just scrapped all those and I went with some balsa wood in the end. And I started off with this kind of simple L-shaped design with a little crossbar. I painted it up, but I really wasn't happy with it in the end because it seemed a little bit wobbly, wonky, badly balanced maybe. Wasn't sure how it was going to stand up on a base, so I went with a different design. So I'm going for this kind of T-shaped design instead, and I'm just going to glue these pieces together after I have textured them. I'm going to use an X-Acto blade to kind of take off some of the edges a little bit and make it look like it's been hand cut. Then I'm going to texture it with the wire brush. And I know it's balsa wood and it should already have a good grain to it, but using the wire brush adds extra detail and it really helps that grain stand out, especially at such a small scale. And then I took a little bit of wood glue, Gorilla wood glue, and just put them together. And I was going to add a few little cross beams as well to help support them, and I added a few bits of cardboard for kind of an iron brace sort of thing that would go around the wood. And then it's just a matter of adding a few little details in terms of hooks and loops and things. So here I've got this little jewelry loop, and I'm just going to poke them into the balsa wood and secure them in with a bit of super glue, and that should hopefully help secure the chain I'm going to add later. Now, hair rollers make excellent cages of different sizes and diameters and whatnot, so I'm going to take off these kind of spiky bits along the edge here with a knife, slice it in half, and then that will give us the main bulk of the cage. You can see the difference between them. Now I'm going to add a top to this because it needs to hang from the wooden post that I previously made. I'm going to do that by creating these two sort of semicircular pieces out of a bit of the roller, the hair roller, and I'm just going to add those to the top. So firstly, just by bending the plastic a little bit, you can sort of half secure it into place, and then you apply a little bit of super glue to the edge. And then do the same again with another piece perpendicular to it, and then glue that in place. And then you can add a little loop to the top, and that's basically your cage done. Give it a bit of a spray undercoat with black, and you can add the chain with a bit of difficulty. Add a bit of chain to the top loop and close it up. And then it's just a case of using your expert level dexterity to carefully thread it through the loops that you've placed on the post. You can also see that I've added a few extra pieces of chain just dangling down there, and this just gives a bit of a nice aesthetic to the finished piece, I think. Now for this thing to stand up straight, it's going to need a base, so I'm going to use a piece of 5" by 2" XPS foam. It's about 5mm thick or so, and that should be enough to help this thing stand up. And obviously add your tile lines and your texture, and then make sure you give it a nice undercoat with black paint and Mod Podge. And after a good undercoating, I'm going to stick the post down with a bit of hot glue, and then I'm going to move on to painting. So I'm going to do an overbrush across all the stonework with a big brush using a medium grey, and then the woodwork is going to get a kind of light brown colour. And all of the metalwork is going to get a Rhinox hide base coat. So it's going to be the cages, the chains, and the kind of metallic braces, the supports that go around the woodwork. And then I'll finish off that ironwork with a bit of riser rust just to add to that rusty old rundown cage look that I'm going for. Then I applied a grey dry brush to all of the woodwork, at least the woodwork that I could get to with a big brush, and that would help preserve the texture of the wood when the wash was applied. For the wash, I'm going to use the same wash for the entire thing, and it's going to be my usual black-brown wash, and this goes over all the dungeon tiles that I have, so it keeps them all uniform and matching, and it's going to go over all this woodwork as well. And then added a few pieces of wood. This is just balsa wood cut to size and shape, and I just glued them into the bottom of the cages. And as a finishing touch, I put a little bit of PVA water mix on the base and stuck down some kind of yellow grass to act as a kind of hay or straw analog, and then just flattened it down so it didn't look too much like a grass tuft. And I also added a little bit of moss to the floor as well, using my usual method. Now of course I'm leaving my cages empty, but if you've got the miniatures to spare, of course you can put some poor unfortunate souls in there, whether it's animals or even just some skeletons or bones in the bottom. That'll be a really cool, nice little detail, but I'm going to leave mine like this for now. Alright guys, there we are, all finished. I'm pretty happy with the way they turned out. The first cage, however, I'm not overly fond of it. I think it serves a purpose, and it looks alright, but maybe the holes in the mesh are maybe a little bit too tight, and it's hard to see through them sometimes unless you really have a good look. But you can feasibly make this cage quite big, and it would house a few models or maybe a larger creature. And yeah, it serves a purpose, and it looks aesthetically, it looks fine, and it's really simple to build and cheap. This mesh is, it's like $1 or £1 or something for a sheet of it, and you can make a few cages out of that. And cocktail sticks, they're 10 a penny. So yeah, super cheap to build and really quite easy. The second cage is by far my favorite of those two, because the spaces in the bars are much nicer. They're wider so you can see through it a little bit easier. In terms of realistic scale, probably not great, because I think a 28mm model would probably be able to fit through between those gaps and in the bars, but we're not going for that kind of realism here. And yeah, so I think it's a better cage. It's nice and sturdy as well. It's made of wood and plastic, so it's not going to go anywhere, and it can just be put down, and it's on any dungeon tile, and it's really useful for imprisoning the odd playable character. And finally, the hanging cages, probably my favorite piece that I created here, because they're just really gimmicky and cool and aesthetically pleasing, and I would definitely recommend gluing the chain with a bit of super glue as much as you can, because it's a pain just to paint them while they're kind of flopping around everywhere. So yeah, definitely give that a go. And I really like the whole rusty aesthetic that I've gone for with all the cages. And so yeah, I'm pretty happy with the way they turned out in general. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please feel free to hit the like button below and leave a comment, and I will try and get back to everyone who comments. And I am also on Instagram if you want to check me out on there. I do also have a Patreon set up. If you want to join the existing honorary Gryphons, feel free to do so. I'm eternally grateful for these guys. They keep this channel going. I think it's with their support alone that I can continuously fund this channel, and I'm really pleased to have you guys support me, and anybody else who signs up as well. So thanks very much, massively. That's it for this video though. I'll hopefully see you all again next time. Thanks for stopping by, and happy crafting.